Okay, so ever catch yourself wondering how philosophy, like actual philosophy, can be relevant to your life beyond just textbooks and lecture halls?
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to see philosophy as this dense, intimidating subject, but at its core, it's really about grappling with fundamental questions we all face.
Exactly. And this audiobook we're diving into, Think Like a Philosopher, does an awesome job at taking those big, heady concepts and making them super practical, like tools for navigating the real world.
I was really impressed by how the author breaks down these complex ideas into manageable, bite-sized pieces. It's very approachable, even if you're completely new to philosophy.
Totally agree. And the best part is it starts by emphasizing that anyone can think like a philosopher. You don't need a fancy degree, just that curiosity, that willingness to question what you think you know.
Before we go on with the podcast, I invite you to download the free bundle, which contains the ebook and an executive summary of all the chapters with the key takeaways. Click on the first link in the description to claim your free bundle now and maximize your learning potential. Now it's free, but it won't be for long, so make sure to grab it while you can.
It's all about cultivating that questioning mindset, which is so important these days, don't you think?
Oh, 100%. Especially in this age of information overload. It's like we're constantly bombarded with different perspectives, different truths, and knowing how to think critically for yourself is more crucial than ever.
It's about becoming an active participant in shaping your own worldview rather than just passively accepting what's handed to you.
Yes. And the book does a great job of giving you the tools to do that.
And speaking of tools, I love how it dives right into exploring different philosophies, like right off the bat. We start with Stoicism.
Okay, so Stoicism. Now, I feel like this one sometimes gets a bad rap. People hear Stoicism and they picture like a robot devoid of emotion.
It's definitely a misconception. Stoicism isn't about suppressing your emotions. It's about mastering them. It's about recognizing that true freedom, true inner peace comes from controlling your reactions to things, not trying to control external events themselves.
Right. So that whole idea of accepting what you can't change, changing what you can, all that good stuff.
Exactly. The Stoics had a name for that. The dichotomy of control. It's such a powerful concept because it helps you realize that so much of our stress and anxiety comes from focusing on things that are ultimately outside of our control.
And the book even talks about practicing this thing called negative visualization.
Right. It sounds a bit intense at first, I know.
It does. So for our listeners who haven't heard of this, break it down for us. What is negative visualization all about?
Okay, so imagine this. You take a moment to visualize, like really vividly imagine the things you value most being taken away. Your health, your loved ones, your possessions, whatever it is. But here's the catch. You're not supposed to dwell on those negative feelings. The point is to actually appreciate what you have even more right now while you still have it.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's kind of like a gratitude exercise in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's also about building resilience. Like by mentally preparing yourself for potential setbacks, you're actually less phased when those challenges inevitably pop up.
That's so true. It's like you've already mentally rehearsed for that difficult conversation or that unexpected expense. So when it happens, you're not completely thrown off your game.
Precisely. And in a way, that leads perfectly into the next philosophy explored in the book, Buddhist detachment.
Before we continue, I want to remind you that you can always find the free audiobook version of this book on the main Grow to the Top channel. Click on the second link in the description to start listening now.
Okay, so from Stoicism, which is about managing your reactions, we shift to Buddhist detachment.
Mm-hmm.
But this isn't about like becoming totally indifferent to the world, right?
Right. It's not about becoming emotionless or withdrawing from life completely. It's more nuanced than that.
So walk us through it. What does Buddhist detachment actually mean?
It's about recognizing that our attachments to things, outcomes, even our own identities, that clinging, that grasping, it can be a huge source of suffering. Buddhism teaches us to find peace not by running away from the world, but by changing our relationship to it.
So it's like loosening the grip a bit.
Yeah, exactly. It's about learning to fully experience life, engage with it wholeheartedly, but without being totally controlled by your desires or by clinging to things staying exactly the same,
Because change is inevitable, right?
Yeah.
Like that's just the nature of life.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes practices like mindfulness and embracing impermanence as ways to cultivate this detachment. It's about radical acceptance, like really acknowledging that everything changes, everything is in flux, which can be a tough pill to swallow, but it's also incredibly liberating.
Because then you're not constantly fighting against the current of life.
Right. You're flowing with it. And that brings us to a philosophy that I think will resonate with a lot of listeners, especially those who are action-oriented. Pragmatism.
Oh, yeah. Pragmatism. Now, this is a philosophy I can get behind. It's all about, like, does it work? Show me the result.
Right. It's about practicality, about testing your ideas in the real world and judging them based on their usefulness.
No ivory tower theorizing here.
Exactly. So for the pragmatist, truth isn't some abstract concept. It's what actually works, what gets results in your life. Exactly. And the audiobook actually gives some really practical advice on how to apply this, like setting weekly goals, evaluating your progress, being open to feedback, and constantly refining your approach based on what you're learning.
So it's less about being rigid and more about being adaptable.
100%. It's a philosophy of continuous improvement,
Yeah.
Always evolving, always tweaking things based on experience.
Okay, so we've talked about Stoicism, Buddhist detachment, pragmatism, and now get ready for this one, cynicism. But before you picture like a grumpy, skeptical person.
Right, because that's not what it's really about. We have to be careful not to confuse the philosophical meaning of cynicism with how we use the word cynical in everyday conversation.
It's easy to do. So break it down for us. What is cynicism in the philosophical sense?
Well, at its core, cynicism is about living a life of radical honesty and authenticity. It's about stripping away all the artificial desires and societal pressures and just being true to yourself, even if it goes against the grain of what everyone else is doing.
So it's about like questioning the status quo.
Yeah, like the original cynics, they challenged everything. They questioned social norms, material wealth, even the pursuit of power. They were all about living in accordance with nature and virtue.
It's like they were saying, don't just blindly follow the crowd, figure out what you believe in and live by that, even if it makes you unpopular.
And that takes guts, doesn't it? It's much easier to just conform.
Totally. And that kind of courage, that willingness to be different, to live authentically, even when it's hard, I think that's something we could all use a little more of these days.
Absolutely. It's about aligning your actions with your values, walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And speaking of shaking things up a bit, the book then takes us into the realm of Epicureanism, which, like cynicism, often gets misunderstood.
It does. So let's clarify. Epicureanism, it's not just about indulging in every pleasure, right?
Right. There's definitely more to it than that.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, the Epicureans, they weren't about just chasing every fleeting pleasure, They believed that true pleasure, true happiness even, came from living simply, having meaningful connections, appreciating those natural pleasures of life.
Okay, so less about wild parties and more about savoring a quiet evening with friends or a really good meal.
Exactly. Think like a warm fire on a cold night, good conversation, a walk in nature. Those simple things, those were the pleasures that Epicureans really valued.
And that actually ties in, I think, to what we were just talking about. Stoicism, Buddhist detachment. It's like finding that inner peace, that contentment, regardless of what's happening around you.
That's a really great point. These different philosophies, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. They can actually complement each other really well.
So it's like you can take bits and pieces from each and create your own personal philosophy.
Exactly. It's about finding what resonates with you, what works for you. Imagine combining, say, the Stoic emphasis on acceptance with the Epicurean appreciation for those simple things. You might find yourself more resilient to challenges, but also more present and grateful for the good things, big or small.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've covered Stoicism, Buddhist detachment, pragmatism, cynicism, Epicureanism. And now we're moving into, I think, maybe the most intimidating philosophy for a lot of people, existentialism.
Yeah, this is where things tend to get a little heavier, a little more, philosophical in that capital P sense.
Because this is where we confront the void.
Well, in a way, yes. Existentialism, it kind of forces us to confront this idea that, the universe doesn't necessarily have any inherent meaning. There's no pre-written script, no grand plan. We're just kind of here.
And that's terrifying.
It can be. But here's the thing, and this is a big but. In that seeming void, in that lack of inherent meaning, we discover something pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Our own freedom.
So it's not about finding meaning out there in the world. It's about creating it for ourselves.
Exactly. We become, in a sense, the authors of our own lives, which is both exhilarating and, a little daunting. It's all on us now.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Okay, so existentialism. We're free. We create our own meaning. And from there, we move to, and I'm interested to hear your take on this one, we move to absurdism.
Oh, absurdism. This one's fun. It takes that existentialist idea of a meaningless universe, and instead of freaking out about it, it's like, all right, cool, let's party.
It's like if nothing matters, we might as well make the most of it.
Exactly. Absurdism recognizes that tension between our deep desire for meaning and the universe just kind of being indifferent, you know?
Yeah.
But instead of falling into despair, it's about laughing at the absurdity of it all, finding joy in creating our own meaning, even though it might be ultimately meaningless.
Okay, that's a mind bender. It's like saying, okay, universe, you do you, I'll do me.
Exactly. It's a philosophy of like courageous defiance. It's embracing those contradictions with a sense of humor, you know, like this is all ridiculous, but I'm going to live my best life anyway.
So from Stoicism to absurdism, we've covered a lot of ground. And what strikes me is that these philosophies, while they seem very different on the surface, they're not necessarily at odds with each other, right? Like you can take elements from each one and kind of weave them together into your own personal approach to life.
Right. It's like this audiobook is giving us this incredible philosophical buffet. We get to taste all these different flavors, different ideas, and then see what we want to put on our own plate.
I love that analogy. It's not about finding the one right philosophy. It's about discovering what resonates with you, what feels true and helpful in your own life.
And what might resonate at one point in your life might not resonate later on, you know? Like we're constantly changing, evolving, so our relationship with these philosophies might change too.
That's so true. What speaks to you in your 20s might be totally different from what speaks to you in your 40s or 50s. So it's not like you choose a philosophy and you're stuck with it forever.
Exactly. It's about being open to that evolution, that exploration. And speaking of exploration, this audiobook doesn't just leave us hanging with all this philosophical wisdom. It actually ends by recommending another book, which I thought was super helpful. It's called Mindful Reasoning: The Key to Effective Critical Thinking.
Oh, interesting. So it's like, okay, now that you've dipped your toes into the world of philosophy, here are some tools to help you go even deeper.
Exactly. Like we've been on this philosophical buffet, but now we need to learn how to properly digest all this amazing food, you know?
So what is mindful reasoning all about? How does it connect to everything we've been talking about?
Well, it argues that to really benefit from philosophy, from any kind of philosophical exploration, we need to become better, more mindful thinkers.
So it's not just about understanding these ideas intellectually, but also about being able to actually apply them to your life in a way that's thoughtful and effective.
Right. It's about bridging that gap between thinking and doing. And mindful reasoning goes into specific techniques for doing that, drawing from both critical thinking principles and like mindfulness practices.
Okay, so it's like a mental training program for applying philosophy to your life.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that inner space where you can examine your thoughts, your beliefs, your assumptions, and make more conscious, intentional choices.
So we've tasted all these different philosophical flavors, and now we're being given the tools to digest it all, break it down, and really integrate it into our lives.
I love that. And here's the best part. It doesn't end there. This is just the beginning, you know? It's like we've been giving this key to unlock a whole universe of thought, a whole new way of seeing the world and ourselves.
And that universe is constantly expanding, right?
Absolutely. There are always new philosophies emerging, old ones being reinterpreted, and our own understanding of these ideas is always evolving. It's a lifelong journey, which is kind of exciting when you think about it.
It's exciting. Okay, so for our listener who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed right now by all this incredible wisdom, where do we even begin? It really is. It's like, where do you even start with all this?
Well, you know what's interesting? The book ends, and I thought this was really smart. It ends with a really simple but powerful piece of advice. Start small.
Okay, so you don't have to like quit your job and move into a cave to become a philosopher.
No, not at all, unless you want to. But no, it's more about like finding ways to integrate these ideas into your everyday life. You know, pick one thing that really resonated with you, just one thing, and experiment with it. See how it feels.
So it's less about like grand gestures and more about making these small, almost like micro adjustments in your thinking, in your behavior, and just seeing what happens.
Exactly. And the cool thing is there's no right or wrong way to do it. You know, it's really about like what works for you, what helps you to navigate your life, your challenges, your relationships with a little more like clarity, with more intention.
It's about making it a lived experience, not just a theoretical one.
Yes. 100%. It's about embodying these ideas, making them your own.
Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much. Such a thought-provoking conversation.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I always love talking about this stuff.
And for our listeners, if you want to keep exploring these ideas, and I highly recommend that you do, be sure to check out Think Like a Philosopher by Tyler Andrew Cole, and that book he recommends at the end, Mindful Reasoning. They're both fantastic resources for anyone who's curious about life, really.
And remember, philosophy, it's not just for academics, It's for all of us. It's about how we choose to show up in the world, how we make sense of things, how we find our own unique path.
So get out there, ask some big questions, challenge your own assumptions, and maybe, just maybe, you'll discover a whole new way of seeing things.
Could have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep exploring.